Hi everybody, it's Michael Crummey, and welcome to Ochre Fest 2020, which is a little unlike most Ochre Fests, but I'm happy to be part of it. And I'm here to talk a little bit about and to read very briefly from a novel of mine called The Innocents. This book came out just last year, and it's a book about a brother and sister, and it's based on a real story, or very loosely on a true story. And this is something that I found in the archives when I was poking through there 7, 8, or 9 years ago. I can't even remember how long ago it was. And whenever I'm in the archives, I'm usually looking for something specific, but I often will just poke just to see what I can find. And I came across a story about an orphan brother and sister. And this was just a one paragraph long description written by or reported by a clergyman. And this was way back at a time when most communities in Newfoundland were too small to have their own church. So the clergy, both Protestant and Catholic, would travel from one community to another. And this clergyman, in the course of his wanderings, happened upon an orphan brother and sister who were living alone in a tiny cove. And when he came ashore, he quickly sussed out that this sister was pregnant. And he automatically assumed, and I'm sure he was right about this, that the brother was the father of the child. And being a clergyman, he immediately got on his clergyman's horse and was not very kind to those youngsters. And the brother drove the clergyman off with a rifle. And that was everything there was in that report. Nothing about how long they'd been orphaned, what happened to them afterwards. And I immediately thought, there's a story in that. And my second thought was, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Not going near it. Because it was obviously a story that is so fraught and so complicated that there are 1,000 different ways I could screw it up. And I was afraid of it, obviously. And but over the course of the next 7 or 8 years, I did find that those children came back to me on occasion. And I was thinking of them in terms of my own childhood and how confusing that move out of childhood into adolescence can be. It was for me. And appallingly confusing, I would say. And I grew up in a time when I had resources. We had a sex education class in school, and when I was almost 13, my mother forced me to read a book called Almost 13, which I was not grateful for at the time, but looking back, it was a good thing. And so I could not imagine what it would have been like for those 2 children, left alone before those changes started coming over them, and with absolutely no one to turn to try and figure out what those changes meant and how they were meant to be in the world as they moved into adolescence towards adulthood, and with only each other for company. So this is a story about 2 children who find themselves in that circumstance. Their mother and father and their baby sister pass away in one awful winter, and they're left basically to their own devices, and they're thrown back on themselves in a way that is a tiny bit similar to what we're all going through now, where we're kind of, the world that we knew has been suspended, and we have been thrown back onto ourselves and to our own resources to try and make a go of things. So I'm just going to read a very short section. The season turned early toward winter, the first snow falling by mid-October, and they resumed their lifelong habit of sharing a bunk, huddling together after the dead fire's heat leaked from the room and the wind whistled through the stud walls. Once enough snow was down, they went together into the backwoods to draw out the logs Everett left standing in the spring, and they spent weeks cutting and splitting junks for fuel. In the heart of the winter, there were long hours of dark and enforced idleness, and they passed the time with made-up games that featured elaborate rules forgotten and redrawn from one day to the next. They whiled away evenings with a call and response they knew as, "There's your answer," asking the most ludicrous or inane or troubling questions they could think of in turn. Do the dead piss and shit in heaven? Why does the brook run downhill and never up? Where do the stars sleep during the day? And replying with belches or farts or some invented animal noise. "There's your answer," the respondent concluded each time, "and may it serve thee." They played a version of hide-and-seek within the cramped bounds of the tilt, the blinder covering their face as the other hid, and keeping their eyes closed as they searched the room with their reaching hands. They sang the fragments of songs remembered from their parents' days. They rearranged the materials on Ada's shelf or drew elaborate designs in the sand near the hearth. They'd settled back into their shared sense of being of a piece, and there was little enough happening in the world around them to disturb the illusion. Everett still woke to the sound of Ada whispering aloud on occasion, and he finally worked up the nerve to ask who she was speaking to. "Our Martha," he said when she confessed. "She's here," Ada said. "I feels her right with us still." "Does she ever say anything back to you?" "Not in anything like words, but I hears her inside. A voice like." "No," she said. "Just a feeling. You don't feel her with you." He shook his head in the dark and lay quiet a while. It made sense to him there would be a division of aptitude and skill between them, and the envy he felt for her peculiar gifts was all admiration, devoid of pettiness. "Do you feel the same thing about Mother and Father?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's just with Martha." He was about to ask her why the difference when it came to him. "She died an innocent," he said. Ada raised a hand to her brother's face. There was a fuzz of blonde hair on his chin, and she brushed her fingers back and forth through the downy growth. "Martha sits at God's right hand," she said, "and she hears our prayers." It made Everett wonder where exactly it was their parents sat in the firmament. He thought that heaven might be like the ocean, that the dead were set adrift within it, and that nothing in that expanse sat still for long, but for their infant sister, anchored at God's side. But not even Ada would venture an answer to that question. Thanks. Enjoy the festival.